Hello everyone, this is G and I'm back with another video. I hope everybody's well today. Today's video is going to be voiceover because I don't feel like being in front of the camera. So, I came across this article online from Bounding into Comics, and as the headline states, X-Men Apocalypse star Olivia Munn claims white people should not direct black stories, Asian stories, Latinx stories. First things first. From what I know of, a lot of Latinos do not like the whole Latinx phrase. They find it disrespectful to their culture and the way their language works. But moving on. In a recent television appearance, actress Olivia Munn, best known for her tenure as the host of G-Force Attack of the Show, man, does that take me back, and her role as Psylocke in X-Men Apocalypse, asserted that white people should not direct films meant to tell black stories, Asian stories, Latinx stories. This is not something that I haven't heard uh, before from actresses or writers in the comic book industry. In fact, the comic book industry has what is, in my opinion, a very bad practice of pairing like for like, but that is something I will get to a bit later when I sort of give a summary of my thoughts. So, moving on. Munn shared her opinion during a March 18th appearance on MSNBC's Andrea Mitchell Reports, where after being asked by the host, "What have you experienced in your career in a business that is supposed to be so open and embracing of diversity?" The actress replied, "For the longest time, it has been that white people can tell everyone's stories. They can tell black stories, Asian stories, Latinx stories," she continued. "We can only support them. The fact that their stories have been whitewashed for so long and is acceptable." Okay, here's my opinion on this. She's not entirely wrong, but she's not entirely right either. Yes, there's a long history in Hollywood with whitewashing. That's a pretty well known fact, I think. But you have to wonder, okay, what about in the modern day? And I'm of the opinion that so long as a writer can write or a director can direct, that their race should largely be irrelevant. And in my opinion, if you are black or Asian or Latino or whatever, and you feel that the mainstream media is not giving you the representation that you want to see or that you think your people deserve, then I think you should, do it yourself then. That's, for example, what Tyler Perry did, right? In his films, in particular, the films featuring the character of Medea, right? The very, southern, hard nosed, church going, gun toting, southern black grandmother, does resonate with a lot of people in the African American community. It's FUBU, right? For us, by us. So I'm very much of the opinion of, if you don't think that, or rather, if you're not seeing what you want to see in the media, make it your damn self, right? But she's not entirely wrong, but I don't think she's necessarily right either. The actress would go on to explain that her opinion stemmed from how her Asian appearance, Mun's mother, Mun's mother is Vietnamese Chinese, has prevented her from being cast in period pieces, presumably those featuring stories featuring predominantly, Jesus Christ, white demographics, as it had led her to believe that she could not tell those stories. Why would you think that? Okay, if it's a white period piece, well, first of all, especially in today's day and age, I mean, everybody's race lifting and race swapping everything. So I'm like, that's a bit odd. I mean, I remember seeing online for a while this like take on like, what is it? Some story about one of King Henry's wives. I think it's like Queen Anne or something, one of those things. And everyone's like, you casted a black woman in the role. Do you realize that she's gonna die? She's gonna lose her head because that's the way the woman's life story played out. But okay. Whenever I see an article come out with a cool movie with a great director that happens to be a period piece, I said, hey, can I meet on this movie? It sounds like a really great concept. Could you give an example, Olivia? Said Munn. I'll hear back that it's a period piece. No other explanation. My Asian face does not fit into a period piece. I cannot tell those stories. That's a really infuriating thing because everyone else is allowed to tell our stories. Well then, here's the thing, Olivia. Why not do your own period piece? Plus, the term period piece is such a vague, open-ended term. Because for a period piece, all you really need is just to set the story in a particular time period. Now I get it. When she says period piece, she's probably meaning something from the 1800s at least, like things like the constant remakes of Pride and Prejudice, right? Or there was some sort of Sherlock Holmes TV show on Netflix recently, or was about his sister or whatnot. So that's probably what she means when she talks about a period piece, something taking place before the 1900s. But if she wants to be in a period piece, maybe she should, look, say, for example, overseas, right? I don't know if it's still around, but Hong Kong used to have a very thriving um, film industry, right? Or she can look to places outside the U.S. She can travel now, right? She can expand her options if she feels like her Asian face doesn't fit into a period piece, right? Or again, just tell your own story, right? Tell your own period piece. Just make sure that you don't get Disney to do it. Just look at the Mulan 2020 film. Having a large company as your backer, that does not always a good film make. But what I see here is an actress complaining about the lack of roles that she gets, but not actually doing something to get more work or to again tell the stories that she wants to see. She would further note that this apparent whitewashing of stories was not just in front of the camera, it's also behind the camera. Look at the Tiger Woods documentary on HBO, said Munn, referencing the recently released two-part series Tiger. It is directed by two white men and starts with his DUI. Yes, Tiger had a lot of traumatic moments, but also he is a black Asian American man who reached heights you never could have dreamed. So, what does the race of the two directors have to do with anything? All they have to do is be true to his life story. And I don't see the problem in and of itself. Now, I can't speak to the documentary because I haven't seen it, but I don't see what the problem is starting out with his DUI. What should matter is if they give a proper representation of his life story, a lot of which has been lived in the public eye because he is a black Asian American man in what is traditionally considered the rich white man sport, that of golf. But continuing, asserting that the aforementioned documentary was so negative, Munn speculated that it felt this way because it was told through the eyes of two men who do not know what it is like to live life in a black man's skin or see the world through the eyes of an Asian man's eyes. It's just the systemic whitewashing that is happening goes so deep and so far back. It's still happening to this day. Okay, so again, she hasn't proven where the racial component is here, right? She's asserting that it's negative, and again that's her opinion, and she's entitled to it, but an opinion is not a fact. And she's asserting that it feels negative because it's told through the eyes of two white men who don't know what it's like to live life in a black man's skin or see the world through an Asian man's eyes. Well, here's the thing, honey. Neither do you. Right? You know what life is like as a biracial, half Asian white woman, right? Some would say that your life has been easier. Some would say that your life has been harder. It all depends. But you don't know what it's like to live life as Tiger either. You weren't breaking into a sport traditionally known for for its whiteness. He was. You don't know what it's like to grow up in the black community. I do. You don't know what it's like to be a man. Neither one of us do. So you don't know either, Olivia, what it's like to live life in a black man's skin or to see life through an Asian man's eyes. You know what life is like through an Asian woman's eyes. I'll give you that, but not through an Asian man's eyes. You don't face the same social pressures or expectations, and don't act like you do. What do you make of Munn's comments? Let us know your thoughts on social media or in the comments below. So this is what I tweeted, because of course I tweeted. Friendly reminder to Miss Olivia Munn that Psylocke started out as a white British woman, became Japanese through a body swap later, and was written created by Chris Claremont and Herb Trimpe. You are quite literally playing a white man's creation. Now, I want to expand a bit on this. Because here's the thing. I'm of the opinion that a good writer is a good writer, in that 9 times out of 10, their race or their gender, their sexuality or whatever is not going to matter because they, in a sense, don't exist in the world, in the story that they're creating. It's all about creating this thing that is completely outside of yourself. And a good writer can write damn near anything because they'll do their research and be respectful. For example, I've heard some people critique the fact that so many white people were behind the scenes of the 2020 Mulan film. I don't believe that's the problem, right? Now, would it have helped them to get, say, like again, someone who is knowledgeable in ancient Chinese culture from the time period that the Ballad of Mulan is set? Yes, but there's no guarantee that even if Disney had done that, that the person they would have hired would have been a Chinese person. Could have easily been a white person who's very educated on the matter. The problem with the Mulan film is the fact that it was completely disrespectful to both the culture it was supposed to be paying respect to the folk tale it was supposed to be paying respect to, and most importantly, to its audience. I've seen videos breaking down various elements of everything they got wrong from African Americans about that film, from a lot of Asians, naturally speaking, from white people. There was this one guy who's a costume designer. It's called The Best Costumes is the name of the channel, and he did a great two-part breakdown of all the costume issues and errors and how the costumes didn't help visually tell the story. And I thought his videos were absolutely awesome about that. The problem is that the producer, the all of the people behind the scenes just were not respectful toward the audience or towards the source material. I mean, again, Disney filmed near a concentration camp, right? It was a lack of respect. It wasn't the fact that it was white people. Okay, they could have had a bunch of Asian creators behind the camera, but if those Asian creators are all ultimately Disney stooges, then what do you think happens? You quite possibly get the same film, or quite possibly worse, from people who should know better. Right? So I'm not of the opinion, generally speaking, that white people should not tell other types of stories. I think that all types of creators should tell ultimately the stories they want to tell, whether it be from their own cultures or from other cultures. Because, say, for example, and I'll bring up comics in this one. Say, for example, people said, oh, you can only be a Catholic man, you can only be a Catholic priest, right, to write Nightcrawler, because like must go with like. You must be a German Catholic priest, right, and you must be male, a male Catholic, to write Nightcrawler. People would get very upset, right? Or that you can only write, say, Storm, if you're an African American woman, right? There was even a writer, Christopher Priest, who left the comic book industry for about 10 years because he got tired of being typecasted as the guy who writes black characters. And believe me, especially given Marvel's recent history, pairing like with like does not always mesh well. For example, a few years ago, there's a couple of examples actually, but a few years ago, I think it was in what, 2017, because the whole Comicsgate thing was still at its peak. Uh, they Marvel hired a queer Latinx woman by the name of Gabby Rivera to write the America Chavez solo series, right? Now, naturally, given the character of America Chavez is a lesbian alien, they decided, okay, let's hire a Latina queer woman. And guess what? Having seen the reviews from that time, following very closely, and having read a few issues myself, that run, that America Chavez run, was hilarious. Except it wasn't meant to be funny. It was poorly written. The art was very, very, very bad half of the time. It was not a well written story because it actually overfocused and overemphasized the fact that America Chavez was a queer alien, quasi Latino woman. What comic fans want is a character. We want a character first, and all these other, things like their nationality or their ethnicity or their sexuality comes in a distant second. What we want is a character first. And this is why her run eventually failed. I don't even think it lasted a full year. I think it panned out around issue 9 or issue 10. But another one, and this is relating again to sexuality, was a few years ago. Marvel had a storyline where Jean Grey more or less mind raped Bobby Drake and made him gay. So Marvel hired a writer by the name of Cena Grace, who was also a gay man, to write the character. Again, I actually did some reviews way back when of that run. Well, not really of the run, of a few issues, right? And guess what? It was terribly, poorly written, drivel. That was not a Bobby Drake. It wasn't Bobby Drake who just happened to now uh, prefer male sexual partners over females. This character went from being Bobby Drake to being Jack McFarland from Will and Grace, but with ice powers. That is literally what he became. And guess what? Cena Grace was given two chances to write this character. Both failed. That I think the second one was supposed to be like a 6-issue miniseries, and it died out at issue 5. Okay, and then of course for years now they have had the character of Carol Danvers as Captain Marvel written exclusively by women, right? Of course, one of the most famous and infamous writers of that character is Kelly Sue DeConnick. And yet the Captain Marvel books never do well. They never sell well. They keep pushing her as this, powerful lead character in the books and in the films, and yet most of the time it doesn't work. Pairing like with like is no guarantee that you're going to get the story that you want. Another example of this is Ironheart. They hired Eve Ewing. And the interesting thing is that the character of Ironheart was created by a white writer, a white male writer by the name of Brian Michael Bendis, and he created the character in honor of his black daughters. And with all due respect to his daughters, I don't think the character of Riri is all that well done. But once they finally got the character from Bendis, I think because Bendis ended up going to DC, and then DC put him on Superman, and then, well, he ruined Superman. But once they got Bendis off the book, they hired an African American writer, a African American woman from Chicago named Eve Ewing, to write a character who's an African American woman from Chicago named Riri Williams. Right? The only thing that sort of saved those early stories was the fact that Eve Ewing is a relatively decent writer. I think she's just not very good for comics, but it was serviceable. Right? But they keep doing this whole like with like thing, and they don't understand that what brought them success in the 80s and for a time in the 90s, well, say like the mid 70s to the say early to mid 1990s, was the fact that they had good writers and they had good artists, right? Another one that they pair like with, at least up until recently, was the character of Kamala Khan, who is also known as Miss Marvel, right? For example, they had since the character is a Pakistani American Muslim girl, they had G Willow Wilson, a white Muslim woman, to write the character, right? So it wasn't exactly, but Muslim, so they had a Muslim writing. But they never used the character of Dust. But then again, they're not going to use Dust because that's an Ethan Van Sciver creation, and they're not about to give him credit for anything. But anyway, as I was saying previously, what brought them their best successes in the 70s, 80s, part of the 1990s was good writing. Was the writing back then perfect? No. But the writing back then was serviceable enough to create some classic stories and some classic hits. Again, Chris Claremont was on X-Men for 15 years. And in those 15 years, he wrote a diverse cast of characters. Everyone from Storm, it was under his pen that Storm became leader of the X-Men. He wrote Wolverine. He wrote Psylocke. He wrote, what's her name? Kitty Pryde. He wrote pretty much every character and villain that appeared for 15 years, from 1975 to about 1990, 1991. In fact, I think the issue of X-Men that sold like over 1 million copies, he did the writing and a young Jim Lee did the art. So here's the thing. What you need is good art and good writing. That will always be the measure of success in comic books. Can you tell a story? Can you provide interesting and cool visuals? Again, John Byrne, wrote She-Hulk, and he's really the one who sort of brought She-Hulk into prominence back in the late 80s and early 90s, because Stan Lee created the character of She-Hulk. And with all due respect to Stan, I've read Stan's run, I've read John Byrne's run. John did a much better job, in my opinion, because he didn't write She-Hulk, or rather, he didn't write her solo series like every other action comic that was going on at the time, which is what Stan did in 1980. So when nearly a decade later, right, they finally give John Byrne the go ahead to write a She-Hulk solo series. Guess what they do? Or rather, guess what he does? He turns it into an action comedy which points out how silly comics are. He uses the character to more or less make fun of himself. And it worked. And it worked. Right? Or another one for me is the 2006 run of Miss Marvel. This is back when Carol Danvers was Miss Marvel. You had the cover art, or rather I guess the inlay or whatever it was, that picture of like, Carol in the Miss Marvel outfit standing in front of the American flag. That's Frank Cho, right? But that series ran for 4 years straight in the mid 2000s during the Civil War storyline. And in my opinion, it's the best written modern Carol Danvers story. And it was written by Brian Reed, a man, right? Because he didn't just write a woman, he wrote a good Carol Danvers. A good writer can write nearly anything. And to try to put people in these boxes and say only black can write black or Asian can write Asian just stifles creativity. Plus, there's no guarantee. There's absolutely no guarantee that a black artist will tell a good or well received black story or what. It's like assuming that every black rapper, for example, is a talented rapper and is the best rapper ever just because they're black. That's simply untrue. It's a matter of talent, right? How hard you work, and a bunch of other things that determine whether something is considered good. And of course, in rap, right, the biggest example of hey, you don't have to be black to do this is of course Eminem, right? So generally speaking, while I can to a certain point, a certain extent, understand where Olivia Munn is coming from, I do believe that again, since she is playing a white man's creation, I think that again, she has a point about whitewashing. I would say in the historical sense, because Hollywood going to be Hollywood. But again, unless she's willing to either only work with Asian or half Asian creators and whatnot, right? I think she needs to expand her horizons a bit. If she wants different types of roles, maybe go overseas. If that's what she wants to do, or again, make your own stories, just like Tyler Perry did, right? But I I cannot support this idea of white people cannot write anything but other white people. And even again with white people, it's like okay, do you mean American? Do you mean British? Do you mean French? Do you mean Nordic? Right? What exactly do you mean when you say white people? White people are not a monolith. Same way Asians, Latinos, blacks, and everything else aren't a monolith. So let's just say that I respectfully disagree with Miss Munn here, but I do wish her well in her career. Perhaps she can find what she is looking for. Or she can continue to play pretend and keep playing Asian characters when she herself is only half Asian, right? And play what was ultimately the product, the product of two white men's minds. Anyway, that's the video. Please let me know what you think, and I will see you all in the next one. Have a good day and night wherever you are. Bye.